Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series, a production of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A transcript of today's podcast is posted on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts.
Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series. My name is Suzanne Miller, and I'm a principal researcher in the SEI Software Solutions Division. Today, I am joined by my friend and colleague, Bill Nichols, a researcher on the measurement and analysis team, and by Hasan Yasar, who's technical director of the Continuous Deployment of Capability Directorate in the Software Solutions Division, and also a friend and colleague. Today, we are here to discuss DevSecOps Metrics. So DevSecOps itself, some of you may have heard about and read about in many of our blog posts. We have lots of them about that. Here, we're going to focus specifically on the measurement aspects of that. And I want to welcome both Hasan and Bill to the podcast today.
Well, glad to be here.
Thanks for having us, Susie. It's glad to talk with you always, all the time. Thank you.
So we're going to have some fun today. But for the viewers that don't know the both of you, I'd like you to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do here on a day-to-day basis. Bill, why don't we start with you and tell us, how did you get into this area of research in particular?
Well, my background is in physics, so I got into programming because we generated a lot of data and had to do a lot of data analysis for my experiment. And that's how I got into programming. And eventually, I ended up at the SEI working with the TSP team. The current work is really just kind of a natural extension of looking at software-generated data for improving the process, for measuring effectiveness. I've worked with teams. And now we're looking at the DevSecOps because there's the promise of generating lots and lots of data automatically as the systems operate.
Okay. And Hasan, how did you end up working in this area?
It's a long question you're asking, Susie. I'll try to make it shortened. So I joined SEI in 2010, and I was a practitioner in the community. My background is EE, Electronics and Electronics Engineering, but I have been writing a software almost 25 years. So I carry out my industry experience on building up a very complex systems and later like building up a simulators and writing accounting software, healthcare-related software. So I ended up at SEI. Since I joined the SEI, I really started to think about what we can do better for the software development and delivery perspective. Since day number one, I have been focusing on how can we get the industry knowledge, make it more engineering principles and concept, make it a science, because there is a science behind it. And there is a really thinking, there is an engineering concept behind all we do. And think about the end-to-end approach. Since I joined SEI, as I said, I have been focusing more improvement, delivery speed with the quality, with the right reliability, with all the quality attributes in it. So then after we focus on the DevOps specifically, last 6-7 years, and I have been teaching DevOps course as well at the CMU, the same concept again, and the new technology, new tool stacks, new mindset makes that goal is achievable. And now we're using DevSecOps term, which is adding a security into the software development process and practices, even though it's a part of it, even though it's part of quality attributes. As a community, we often ignore the security as not including at the beginning of the life cycle. So now, when we look at the journey last couple of years, kind of we fixed of setting up DevSecOps environment. It is not a problem anymore. It is much easier to build up an end-to-end pipeline, either using a various ready tools or using a cloud platform or using various ready solution. But one thing is really missing in this pipeline concept or the fast concept. We can go fast. It is great. But we don't want to be creating a pro application or a product. First, is not meeting the business needs. Second, we are accruing a lot of technical debt in our work, which we don't have a right measurements. That's the reason that really strike us, and Bill and I, we have been focusing on how can we really make sure that we are delivering the right product. At the same time, meeting the needs of the users and also helping us to go faster, but at the same time saving a time. So now we need to measure a lot of things in the pipeline, which we are creating a lot of data, as Bill said. So since we have end-to-end connectivities, all these tools, so we have end-to-end process and practices, it is creating enormous data for us. If we don't know how to use data properly, that we're going to fail. So that's the reason I ended up this one and carry out the what is next step after DevSecOps. This is the time. Let's talk about the metrics.
Okay.
The next step.
So Bill recently published an SEI blog post and talking about the current state of DevSecOps metrics. And I really do encourage people to go look at that because I think it gives a very nice history of sort of where have we come in measuring software in general, not just about sort of landed in DevSecOps, but it's a very nice history of sort of the measurement questions that we've been answering. So from my perspective and from Hasan's, it's obvious why we should care about DevSecOps metrics. But Bill, I wanted to hear your perspective for a minute on what is it that you think is important for our viewers to understand about metrics in the DevSecOps environment?
Well, a lot of our customers, like the DoD, are making the transition to DevSecOps, and there's a lot of talk about moving faster. But the basic question is, how fast does it have to be? What is good enough? And how do we know if our program is actually being effective? So you want to have some concept of what is your overall program health? Am I developing a sustainable, effective, efficient system? That's important to all of us, whether you're in business or in government. And you actually want to know that you're delivering value. So are you doing things that will consistently deliver value? So we want to look at the metrics, and what I try to express in the blog post is that there are a lot of metrics that are being used, but you have to think about them in terms of the right questions. What are you trying to answer? What do you want to know? And if you don't understand what your fundamental questions are, all of that data can really just kind of lead you down the rabbit hole. I mean, should I be working faster? Well, how's that going to affect my quality or other productivity aspects? Am I working faster on the right things? How fast does it have to be? I mean, if it doesn't have to work, I can do it really fast.
Most of our DoD systems require that they work.
So. I'm just going to add one thing Bill said, Susie, if you give me permission.
Sure.
And really, Bill started a good question about the why we need to have data. That reminds me a good statement from Lord Kelvin. He's a physicist. You know what he said? That really struck me. He said, when you can measure what you are speaking about and can express it in numbers, you know something about it. But when you cannot measure it, when you cannot express in numbers, your knowledge is a marriage of unsatisfactory kind. So it really struck me because if we don't know our system, then how can we say that we are doing well? To show that what well means, we need to measure it. If we are looking for development practices, if you're looking for some cycle, anything else, it starts from why. If we have to understand the system, that's really a good statement from Lord Kelvin, really describing why we have to do, because we have to know our system. To know our system, we need the numbers.
And that's, as Bill was saying earlier, and you yourself, Hasan, with this DevSecOps pipeline. So one of the things that's characteristics about this pipeline is that we can run many, many tests. We can run many, many cycles through it in an automated fashion, which makes it much faster, right? We go back to the punch cards. It was 4 hours to compile, and then it was desktop. And now we've got this pipeline. So it's very, very fast, which means we get lots and lots of data. And I take Bill's point about knowing what data is important has to do with what questions you're trying to answer. But the other thing about that is, how do you understand which data you need to trust and which data you need to question? That's one of the things that for me is underneath a lot of the churn about DevSecOps metrics. So I'm aware of one program I work with, not just DevSecOps, but they have 150 measures defined related to software in their software development plan. And I looked at this list, and It was literally a list of 150 long without categorization. And I just kind of went nuts because there was no sense of why do I need this and what are the limitations? What data do I need and what data needs to be trustable for me to be able to trust the measures that come out of it. So talk a little bit about how do we go from this pile or lake full of data to knowing that we have data we can trust and knowing how we can use it.
Well, now you're talking about the entire data chain. It always starts with what are your goals? And when I say you have your own personality, your own role, your own responsibilities in the organization. If I'm a developer, I have a different set of needs than my manager has. If I'm the program manager or project or program manager, I have an entirely different set of needs. It's foolish to think that the same data is going to be as useful to one as to the other. So the first thing you have to do is really understand who is my user, who is the consumer of this information, what decisions must be made, and what do I need to know to answer those questions. Now it's not just a matter of trying to find relevant data, it's actually searching through the system to see what are the sources of information, what are the indicators that I could use that will answer this question. With these indicators, what can I actually measure? Now you've got other questions about what is the reliability, the repeatability of those measures? How do they correlate with other measures? That is, what are the factors that might otherwise influence this? So you have to understand that entire tool chain. One of the beauties of DevSecOps is that you have instrumentation at so many points along the development chain that you can actually put some of these pieces together. You can look at things in isolation, or you can look at the entire gestalt, the production as a whole, and start to understand how do these pieces come together. But it always starts with what kind of decisions do I need to make and what could be informed. Then you look for the appropriate data to inform that decision. And I share your frustration. I see a lot of laundry lists of metrics, and it's like, well, what was this metric? Who needs this metric? What's the context? What are the conditions under which this needs to be taken? If you haven't defined those, you're really just generating a list of write-only data.
And the way so I'm not going to quote Lord Kelvin, but this is I don't even know who originally said this, but I use this a lot of times. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And that's what I'm seeing in a lot of the measurements, DevSecOps and otherwise, is, oh, I can measure this item. So here's a graph that shows you what that looks like, and I can measure this. And so it's disconnecting the data from the purpose. And you can tell I have a little passion on this subject.
Well,
I hear you. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think that when I get the question from my students, I'm getting similar things. I always say, what matters to you? So if we are really measuring something, it really what matters to a developer, because developer has a different needs as developer, and versus the program manager different needs. So their interests are different, but when you look at more about the business case, if I'm a developer, I would like to see my defect ratio. I would like to see my success build. Maybe sometimes I would like to see the number of line of commit that I'm doing it. Maybe my manager is looking for my productivity based on how much I produce in my code repository. So it really depends on a consumer, depends on the users of the data sets. That goes back to the why I need that. Let's find out that answer. Because it's generating data. But the one thing I have to open up, Susie said at the beginning, like the trust of the data, I feel more confident ever before, because now we are generating data automatically from the DevSecOps environment. We're going to come up in details and discuss that. We are not using a manual data creation anymore. At the past, we were making, I'm not saying making up, but sometimes we are measuring the data based on what enters manually, which is a human. If human enters the data, always there is error prone in it, like in terms of quality, and we may see some issues for the quality of the data. Now, data is being generated automatically from DevSecOps environment. That's the beauty of end-to-end pipeline. So I'm not worrying about the truth of the data, but I'm worrying about the misuse of data for something else. If we use the misuse of data, we'll have a wrong decision for any criteria we would like to do. So source of the truth is corrected, but misuse of data, it is going to get more. So that kind of like, what are we using for to decide something?
But I do want to caution that we still have humans involved, right? And the example that comes up in my mind a lot is I'm a developer working on code, and I make the choice of whether I'm going to commit that code to the repository as soon as I finish that segment, or if I'm going to go off and do something else, and then I'm going to commit that code later. Code hasn't changed, right? Now, what I did do is I affected the cycle time of how long that code was in development versus when it went into integration and commitment. And that's a very minor thing, but we still have to be aware, I think, that it is not a complete until some robot is actually writing the code and submitting it. We still have humans involved in this process, and so it's not a completely automated process as we might like to think about it.
I think that maybe I should open up a little bit. When I say automated, Susie, I'm talking about generating of data is automatically. But yes, human is part of creating some actions. As you describe, actions are the committing as an example. Actions can be creating a estimate. So another human is in the loop. So human is in the loop, but generation of data, it is done automatically from the system. When I say the automation, it's basically data generation automatically done. Like I can get
the human doesn't have to record the time that they put the commitment in. The system automatically
system does automatically for us. So, which is, we may discuss again probably, but the data that we are collecting, the system is generating for us, we can really find out what is the root cause of analysis of the cycle time is not reflecting the truth. So maybe we can look at, developer are not checking the code, maybe there's something else in between, messing up and numbers generated from the systems. That's the reason we can go find out and we can trace out some actions we have to do. So again, I'm worrying about data generation is more true, but how we are entering the system, yes, that's right. Human is involved. Human enters the estimates, human write the code, human build up the stuff. Human can do we are not there yet, but the generation of data is automatically done, Susie. That's the portion I like.
Okay, fair enough. Bill, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, one of the things we found back with many years of taking TSP data is there were some types of data that we could very reliably get. And oddly enough, getting programmer time was actually pretty easy. But it's the things that they didn't do all the time or routinely where it got progressively less consistent. For example, we had maybe a third of the teams that were that were accurately recording size data. Well, that should, in principle, be one of the easiest things to get because you can write a simple script to query your source repository and get very accurate counts of size. But if that process isn't automated, it doesn't happen. And if people have to do it by hand, well, sometimes it happens with errors. And, being human, every time we do something, we've got a chance of introducing our human defects. So the automation is a chance for consistency, repeatability. It provides a lot of opportunities. I don't know that we necessarily want to get away from humans recording some of their own data. That's yet to be determined. But we do know that there are lots of things that we should be able to get automatically that we haven't been getting in the past.
So that was one sort of limitation of DevSecOps metrics is that where humans are in the loop, human action may change the actual source of truth, if you will, in the data. What are some other limitations that people should be aware of? Because I want to make sure that this is a very burgeoning area. And as you know, Bill and I have both spoken about lots of different measures, but what are some things people should be aware of and cautious about in terms of the DevSecOps metrics that are currently in use commonly or that they may be seeing coming up?
One of the things that you definitely don't get is when things are recorded automatically, you have this same kind of labeling problem that we often see in machine learning. Are you doing supervised or unsupervised? And when we had humans gathering data, they had a lot of contextual information that could give you a very rich data set that would include some of the context. It was very easy for them to look at a defect and do some things like categorization, ranking severity. We don't have good mechanisms in place to do those sorts of things automatically. The things that come out most naturally are some of the more obvious ones, like timestamps. It's very easy to measure flow rates. Unfortunately, I think what we've seen in a lot of the DevSecOps measures so far is that's the easy thing to get, and that's primarily what they've been focused on, without asking the deeper questions about what are your real information needs. So I think part of our challenge moving forward is being able to dig a little deeper and trying to uncover some of that contextual information and take more advantage of what the automated tools can offer.
Hasan?
Yeah, so what I have been seeing so far, as Bill said a couple of them already, but I would like to open up a little bit. And current usage of the metrics more about the tool-generated data. So when we, I saw many examples, when we look at the code complexity, or when we look at in a specific code commit as an example, the consumers are looking for that tool specifically. So more relying on a tool dashboard, it may not have the correct metrics for them. Like looking for number of build on a Jenkins server, if it is not tied with the business goals, it's great to have just specific the number of build or number of failure, but sometimes metrics are the correlation of multiple data sets. So by looking for just a single tool, it is limiting our metrics. It's limiting our looking for end-to-end perspective. So what I see right now, most of the implementer or the users are limiting what the tools are generating in the pipeline, in the software pipeline. Maybe like, if maybe you're using a issue tracking system as a number of cases, an example, we can generate it. If you're looking for the specific repository, maybe you have a version and log and audit. So each of them actually generate from the tool as an output. So by looking at metrics, it is limited to what tool is offering. So we have to look at tying back to the why question at the beginning. So we may have to pick the data from various tools and combine those data sets and present what we are trying to measure. That's the portion is
the data visualization aspect.
Data visualization, but also aggregating data is also missing, Susie. Like if you're going to calculate some metrics, it is requiring multiple sources to aggregate those and calculate that. By calculating just a number of cases, it is limiting. I'm giving you one example. If I'm looking for my cycle time, if my cycle time I will measure based on the number of cases and then case open and close, it is not reflecting the true pictures. I have to look at a deployment of that feature that goes into production. That's going to give me a true metrics. What I'm saying, like it is not just the one tool generated, Susan.
So one of the things that we've talked about in the measurement community is the atomic measures, which is what you're talking about, are the actual data that I can gather from a source, right? From, in this case, the tool. But the measure itself is usually aggregated from and composed of multiple atomic measures. And what I'm hearing you say, and I heard sort of Bill say it a little differently, is that we need to be careful not to limit the questions to what the tool can provide. We need to ask the questions that are the real business operational questions, find the data wherever it is and compose it into the measures we need, rather than letting the tool drive, well, I can give you this, so this is what you must need to have. This will answer this question, so that must be the right question because I can give you this. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair assessment. That's right. So we don't want to limiting ourselves just the tool only. We have to think about beyond the tooling. Let's look at what matters to us and aggregate data sets. And I asked that question many times. Always we are getting response from such tool dashboard. That's not enough to measure the data from just one tool dashboard. Because technically, if we focus on the tools, and tool is dictating our metrics. No, metrics or measurement or business case should dictate how we are gathering and aggregating data. We don't want to go dictating based on tool, because another things I have to open up as well, in the tools that we measure, It's basically more about some code repositories. If you look at it's going to be a little bit technical, but if you look at just the static analysis perspective, we might be analyzing just the code base only, which is the only single repositories. But if you look at the project has multiple code repositories in it. We have multiple components in it. So by looking one element and say that we are doing well in terms of better the defect ratios for a given repository, it's not enough. We need to aggregate multiple projects, combine together, say, here is our metrics on a system or project that we are building. But the current metric is about the project, it's just a tool-centric.
Well, and to take it a little further, doing static analysis of a code base does not tell me how it integrates with hardware components. It doesn't tell me how it integrates with other things projects that it needs to interface with. So again, looking at what is the question, becomes the question, as Bill would say.
Well,
Bill, you want to comment?
Yeah. Let me offer another real world complication, and that is that not all the pipelines are going to use exactly the same tools. They may use different subsets. So one of the things we have to be conscious of is different pipelines are not going to be producing exactly the same data. So that's one of the things we're going to have to address. And as you try to aggregate things like at the program level, that's going to be one of the big questions coming up. How do you deal with the heterogeneous pipeline situation?
Gotcha. So based on sort of this discussion so far, what is your vision for the future of DevSecOps metrics based on what you're seeing in terms of the ability to add in things like machine learning, about how we are training people differently, things like that all kind of give us a forward-looking perspective? And I'll let Bill start and then go to Hasan.
Well, I think fundamentally, the vision is that we're going to have a lot of data to work with. It's going to be collected automatically, and we're going to be able to use this data to reason about how we do our work, not only the program health, but how we're actually working individually and how the product or the project is transforming it into a product. And that should be there in ways that we can reason about it based on real numbers. And that's a future state, because right now a lot of this is kind of done with a wet finger in the air and a lot of subjective feel. And I think we could make this much more quantitative, and that's not really a bad thing. This quantitative capability is how all pro athletes work. If you've ever seen someone like a golfer, they're recording essentially every stroke on the course. And not just counting the strokes, they're talking about what kind of club they used, how far it went, what were the conditions. If you really care about being a world-class performer, that's the kind of thing you have to do. But it's a really hard thing to do, and I think the quantitative stuff, the measurement as a Fitbit that you carry around with you, that kind of capability to standardize the measurement, make that available, is something that could be an end state. The data is to a large extent just there for you. People know how to collect it. They know what the metrics should be, and you can go and visualize those metrics in a way that's meaningful for you.
Okay, and Hasan?
I think a few things Bill said. Yes, we need to get more aligned for the consumer perspective. And also I'm envisioning is building up a great visualization capabilities. Then we can get a bunch of source of input into the pod, and then let the consumer to use the data, which is a true data, first of all, comes from the machine. And at the same time, will help us to do the better decision, which is our business case, in an environment so we can consume in a better way. And also, all data should be actionable for us. We don't want to be creating a data just for the sake of data. We would like to create some actionable result for the data that we are collecting. So we're looking for what type of actions can be done. If I am measuring the deployment lead time or delivery frequencies or the cycle time, what actions I have to take it and go back and change some processes and practices in the environment. So more about actionable and more about visualization of data. And we can use various platforms. So another things we have been looking for and working with Bill together, is there any way we can abstract that model, getting away from a higher level and tie into the key software metrics so we can apply into DevSecOps environment? Yes, we are collecting data from the tools, but how can we aggregate those and make it a model so we can use various tools? It can be a GitLab one example, it can be a Stash one example. It doesn't matter what type of tools we are using it, but data is the data. Let's have a common elements of what type of data we need to measure certain the data sets or the certain monitoring components so we can really collect various components of the DevSecOps environment. So setting up what the DevSecOps framework it is and describe how to collect it, then also make it actionable result of the dashboard, because it's really important to build up a common dashboard or some dashboard that's going to help the other users, such as developers and lead managers or the security persons, or depends on who are the consumers, define that actionable metric, Susie.
I will add one thing to that. I want to see the equivalent of the beer game for DevSecOps metrics going all the way up to the business. Because that's what I sort of heard it in what you said a little bit, Hasan, but to me, the vision of DevSecOps metrics is becoming an essential element of running a software business. And that means not just the models, but the connections to the business elements is in there too. So I'm going to add my own little vision piece to that.
Thank you so much. You open up a great topic, and I always teach in my class, software security class. The reason that we are not able to get a security in active and early because we are not able to tie to the business. The metrics should give us a reason to tie into the business. Like usually, if the business doesn't care, nobody's going to put the time and effort for the security. If you show the value for the business, if you show any breach in the data, what is the effect into the business, what the risk associated, now the managers will say, let's get it done, because I don't want to be hurting my reputation. I don't want to hurt some legalities. Let us get it done. So tying into the business case and tying into the specific risk, it is going to solve a lot of problem. And other things like in the manager perspective is that usually the managers, they will like to say, what is the impact to me? If I don't do this, what is the impact?
Right.
The best way to show the impact with the data, with the numbers. If you don't do, here is the impact. If you spend X number of days, you will get better, but here's the impact for you, which is exact for business type. Glad that you brought up.
Any final comments on that, Bill?
Well, I like to look at some of the analogies we've seen in pro sports analytics, because that's kind of exploded over the last 20 years. And as they've looked more carefully at some of the underlying data, it's kind of, most of the insights they gather just reinforce what we already know. Okay, we already knew Babe Ruth was one of the greatest hitters ever. Okay, but you start looking more deeply and you start realizing, these basketball players who are leading their teams in points are really hurting the team. Why is that? They don't have great shooting percentages, and type numbers of shots don't really matter much for basketball, because every possession ends in a shot almost. As you gather more information and you understand the system, you start to understand how the little things actually contribute to the actual outcomes, and that gives you a lot of capability to affect those outcomes early in the work. And that's where a lot of the value added comes from. And as software becomes more and more of a commodity, that kind of competition, I think, is going to come to the fore, and the organizations that are better at that are the ones who are going to succeed.
Excellent point. So I want to finish up by asking a little bit for our viewers, if they're interested in this topic, how do they get started? It's like, we have a DevSecOps pipeline and nobody likes how our measurements are being used now. How do we get started in doing better at that? And what resources are available from the SEI, of course, from the SEI, that will help me with that? So tell us a little bit about resources that you recommend and where you expect people to get started. We'll start with Hasan this time.
Yeah, I really advise our listeners and look at SEI website and podcast and webinar so they can get a lot of information, understanding the commonalities, understanding the concept or principles of DevSecOps and DevOps. Understand the metric. We have a lot of references of the software metrics. They can utilize it. And also, I advise to the team, they have to really understand what tools they were using it, what type of data they're generating, and they should think about what matters to me. Because that's real stuff from them. And I really advise to ask them first, so what makes me up in the night? What matters to me? And then I'm sure they're going to find an answer. And then when they need help, which they will look at how can I collect what the metrics methodologies are. And I want them, everybody, go to the SEI website and take a look at the DevSecOps space and Agile space. A lot of write-ups and content over there, Susie.
And Bill, what are some of your favorite pieces of advice?
Well, one of them would be think about your own work practices very carefully. Just be mindful of them. There's a lot of work going on right now in coming to terms with the kinds of metrics we can get out of DevSecOps. So I wouldn't tell you that we have something today that's going to necessarily solve your needs, but the fundamentals of being able to understand your work practices, understand what you're trying to do overall and in each of these steps is where you start. Once you understand what your overall objectives are, you can think about what do I need to do to get there? What steps do I have to do individually? Now, how can I actually measure these steps? What is an efficient step? What is an effective step?
Okay. And I'm so surprised, Bill, you didn't mention our work. We have a history of work in goal question indicator metrics. And so that's the thing I would add into this is if you don't know how to get from the data to the why, the SEI's got tons of stuff on using goals, questions, indicators, measures as a framework. And there's lots of stuff, blogs, technical notes, and things like that. And I would point people to that as well, even though it's pre-DevSecOps in terms of when it was generated historically. That's exactly what we're talking about today, is using that method of thinking about things. So even though we may not be talking about the tools, the thinking framework, I think, is still good for today. Would you disagree?
If you
probably have that conversation.
Yeah, and if you want to look at the GQIM, that material, the actual course material, is posted under the Creative Commons on the SEI website now. So that's a great place to go and start. And think about using like the indicator templates to record all the information as you go.
There you go. All right. I want to thank both of you for joining me today. This is a topic, as you can tell, that I enjoy thinking about and helping people with. And I want to thank both of you for your work in this area. We will probably have more things to talk about in the future as this area evolves. And so I look forward to that. I do want to tell our viewers that we will include links in the transcripts to some of the resources we mentioned, the Creative Commons and some of the blog posts related to both DevSecOps and measurement. And I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us. Please do not hesitate to send questions to info@sei.cmu.edu on this topic, and we will do our best to answer those. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. This episode is available where you download podcasts, including SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. It is also available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and the SEI's YouTube channel. This copyrighted work is made available through the Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. For more information about the SEI and this work, please visit www.sei.cmu.edu. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.